The narrative of a nation overwhelmed by a migration crisis is a powerful and persistent feature of public debate. However, a comprehensive analysis of the available data reveals a far more complex and dynamic picture, one shaped by global events, shifting government policy, and long-term historical patterns. This section provides a statistical, contextual, and historical examination of migration to the United Kingdom to determine whether the crisis framing accurately reflects the empirical reality. 1.1 Contemporary Migration Flows, a Statistical Analysis. An examination of the most recent data from the Office for National Statistics, ONS, is essential to establish a factual baseline for migration flows. In the year ending December 2024, provisional estimates place the UK's net migration figure at 431,000. This figure represents the balance of 948,000 people immigrating to the UK and 517,000 emigrating from it. This latest figure marks a significant turning point. It follows a period of historically high immigration which peaked at approximately 1.2 to 1.3 million per year in 2022 and 2023. The net migration figure for the year ending June 2023, for instance, was estimated at a record 906,000. The subsequent sharp decline is therefore a critical feature of the current landscape. Immigration in the year to December 2024 was below 1 million for the first time since the year ending March 2022, indicating a rapid cooling of the post-pandemic surge. The primary driver of this recent reduction is a substantial decrease in immigration by non-EU nationals, which fell by 44% from its 2022 peak. This decline is not a random fluctuation, but a direct consequence of government policy changes, particularly the restrictions on dependents accompanying individuals on work and study visas, which came into effect in early 2024. In the year ending December 2024, study remained the most common reason for non-EU migration, 266,000 people. But this was down from a peak of 438,000 in the year ending September 2023, with the fall concentrated among dependents. This demonstrates that migration levels, rather than being an uncontrollable force, are highly responsive to specific policy levers. The perception of a perpetual crisis is arguably fueled less by the absolute number of migrants at any given moment, and more by the sheer volatility of the figures. The data shows that net migration could multiply more than five-fold in a decade, from around 160,000 in mid-2012 to the peak of over 900,000 in mid-2023, before being sharply curtailed by reactive policy changes. This rapid fluctuation, amplified by political rhetoric, creates a persistent sense of instability, and a system that appears to lack predictable control, feeding a crisis narrative even as the numbers are falling. A stable, predictable, and transparent immigration system, rather than simply lower numbers, may therefore be a more critical factor in building public confidence. It is also vital to note a significant methodological shift in how the ONS produces these statistics. Since 2012, estimates have been based on a new methodology using administrative data, which has been backdated to that year. In terms of scale, as of June 2023, an estimated 4 million non-UK born residents lived in England and Wales, equivalent to approximately 18% of the population. Year-ending total immigration, net migration ONS, total asylum applications Home Office. December 2014, 632,000, 319,000, 313,000, 32,860. December 2015, 631,000, 297,000, 335,000, 40,020. December 2016, 589,000, 339,000, 250,000, 38,980. DEC 2017, 592,000, 344,000, 248,000, 33,800. December 2018, 627,000, 345,000, 282,000, 35,566. December 2019, 715,000, 427,000, 288,000, 44,800. December 2020, 623,000, 388,000, 235,000, 36,041. December 2021, 993,000, 473,000, 520,000, 58,500. December 2022, 1,257,000, 557,000, 700,000, 89,300. December 2023, 1,326,000, 466,000, 860,000, 100,500. December 2024, around 948,000, 517,000, some 431,000 up to 111,084 to June 2025. Sources: ONS Long-Term International Migration Statistics, Home Office Asylum Statistics. Note: migration data from 2020 to 2021 is subject to higher uncertainty due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Asylum data is for the calendar year until 2024, where the figure is for the year ending June 2025. 1.2. The asylum system. In European context, the issue of asylum is one of the most politically charged and publicly visible components of the migration debate. In the year ending June 2025, a total of 111,084 people claimed asylum in the UK, a figure that represents a record high, surpassing the previous peak in 2002. This has placed significant strain on the asylum system, with costs rising to £5.4 billion in the 2023-24 financial year, largely driven by the reliance on expensive hotel accommodation to house applicants while they await a decision. A closer examination of how these asylum seekers arrive complicates the public narrative. While irregular routes, particularly small boat crossings across the English Channel, are a significant method of entry, accounting for 39% of claimants, a substantial and growing proportion, 37% in the year to June 2025, entered the UK legally on other forms of leave, such as work, study or visitor visas, before claiming asylum. This trend, which has seen claims from those on visas triple since June 2022, suggests a more complex dynamic than is often portrayed. It may reflect deteriorating conditions in home countries for individuals previously able to secure visas, or it could indicate that the asylum system is being used as an alternative pathway when other forms of leave expire. This shift demands a policy focus that looks beyond border security to the integrity and pressures within the entire immigration system. Crucially, these national figures must be placed in a wider European context to be properly understood. In the year ending March 2025, the UK received the fifth largest number of asylum applications, 109,343, within the EU plus bloc, the 27 EU member states plus Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein and Switzerland, Germany 218,550, Spain 164,830, France 159,260, and Italy 151,525. All received substantially more applications. When these absolute numbers are adjusted for the size of the host country's population, the UK's intake appears even more modest, ranking 17th in the EU plus bloc. 1.3. A historical perspective on a nation of immigrants. Section 2. Crime and public safety. Perception versus reality. The assertion of a rising crime rate is a potent driver of public anxiety and is frequently linked implicitly or explicitly to immigration. A rigorous analysis requires a careful examination of official crime statistics, an understanding of the different methodologies used to measure crime, and a review of the academic evidence concerning any causal relationship between migration and crime rates. 2.1 Methodologies in Crime Measurement, CSEW versus Police Records. The CSEW is a large-scale, face-to-face victimization survey that asks people about their experiences of crime over the past year. It is widely considered by statisticians to be the most reliable measure for understanding long-term trends in high-volume crimes that affect the general population, such as theft, criminal damage, fraud and violence. In contrast, police-recorded crime data reflects offences that are reported by the public and subsequently recorded by police forces. While this data is essential for capturing lower volume but higher harm offences that the CSEW cannot reliably measure, such as homicide, robbery and offences involving weapons, it is a less dependable indicator of overall crime trends. 2.2 Long-term and recent crime trends. When examining the most reliable long-term data from the CSEW, the overarching trend directly contradicts the narrative of a continuously rising crime rate. The CSEW shows that crime against individuals and households has, in general, decreased over the last decade. However, the most recent data presents a more complex picture that helps to explain public perception. The CSEW for the year ending March 2025 estimated 9.4 million incidents of headline crime, a 7% increase compared to the previous year. Critically, this rise was almost entirely attributable to a single category, a 31% surge in fraud, which reached an estimated 4.2 million incidents, the highest since this measure began in 2017. An analysis of police-recorded data for the most serious violent offences further challenges the notion of a society becoming more violent. In the year ending March 2025, the number of homicides decreased by 6% to 535 offences, the lowest level since 2014. Offences involving firearms also saw a significant 21% decrease. Offences involving knives or sharp instruments remained largely stable, with a negligible 1% decrease. The data does, however, reveal increases in certain high-visibility crimes that likely shape public experience and fear. Police-recorded shoplifting offences rose by 20% in the year to March 2025, reaching their highest level since current recording practices began in 2003. This perception is compounded by the performance of the criminal justice system. Charge rates for many common offences remain exceptionally low. For example, in the year ending March 2024, only 4.3% of residential burglary offences and 2.2% of vehicle theft offences resulted in a charge or summons. This creates a powerful sense of impunity where victims see little prospect of justice, which can fuel public dissatisfaction and fear irrespective of overall long-term crime trends. 2.3. The Immigration Crime Nexus, a review of causal evidence. The implicit link between immigration and rising crime is a recurring theme in public discourse. However, it is crucial to move beyond anecdotal claims and misleading statistics, such as those that confuse court proceedings with convictions, and to examine the findings of rigorous academic research that seeks to establish causal relationships. The most authoritative UK-based research in this area comes from the Migration Observatory at the University of Oxford. Their analysis concludes that there is no evidence to suggest a causal link between rising immigration and trends in violent crime. A seminal study by Bell et al. 2013 provides a more granular analysis by distinguishing between different migrant groups and their economic circumstances. The research found that a 1 percentage point increase in the share of asylum seekers in a local population was associated with a 1.1% rise in property crime. In stark contrast, a 1 percentage point increase in the share of migrants from the A8 countries, who arrived after 2004 primarily for work, was associated with a 0.4% fall in property crime. Neither group was associated with any statistically significant change in violent crime. The theoretical explanation for this divergence is rooted in economics and opportunity. The traditional economic model of crime posits that individuals are more likely to engage in criminal activity when their opportunities in the legal labor market are poor. This presents a powerful reframing of the issue. The small, specific link between one subgroup of migrants and one category of crime is not an indicator of inherent criminality. Instead, it appears to be a direct and predictable consequence of a UK policy that combines slow asylum processing with a ban on legal employment. The crime problem within this specific context is not an imported one, but one that may be inadvertently created by the very system designed to manage immigration. Section 3. The state of free expression, restriction, protection, and the censorship claim. The assertion of widespread government censorship requires a careful and nuanced evaluation of the UK's recent legislative landscape. An analysis of key acts of Parliament reveals a complex and at times contradictory approach to freedom of expression. 3.1 The shifting boundaries of public protest. The legal framework governing the right to protest in the UK has been significantly reshaped by two recent pieces of legislation: the Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Act 2022 and the Public Order Act 2023. The legislation grants police new and expanded powers to manage and restrict protests. This includes the ability to impose conditions on demonstrations based on the noise they generate, if it is deemed to have a relevant impact on people in the vicinity. The Public Order Act 2023 went further, creating a range of new criminal offences specifically related to protest. These include locking on, attaching oneself to a person, object or land, being equipped to lock on, obstructing major transport works, and interfering with key national infrastructure. These reforms have been met with fierce opposition from civil liberties organisations. Groups such as Liberty and Justice argue that the new laws are incompatible with Articles 10, freedom of expression, and 11, freedom of assembly of the European Convention on Human Rights, which are enshrined in UK law. The Joint Committee on Human Rights warned that the combined measures would likely have a chilling effect on the right to protest. Critics contend that the vague and broad nature of terms like serious disruption gives police excessive discretion and effectively criminalises forms of peaceful but disruptive dissent that have historically been a vital part of democratic life. 3.2 Regulating the Digital Sphere. The Online Safety Act 2023. The Online Safety Act 2023 represents one of the most ambitious attempts by any Western democracy to regulate online content. Its stated primary objectives are to protect children from harmful and age-inappropriate material and to compel online platforms to tackle illegal content and activity. The Act imposes a statutory duty of care on social media companies and search services, requiring them to implement systems and processes to assess and mitigate the risks of illegal content appearing on their platforms. The legislation is enforced by the communications regulator Ofcom, which has been granted formidable powers, including the ability to levy fines of up to £18 million or 10% of a company's qualifying global annual turnover, whichever is higher. A central and highly controversial provision is the power for Ofcom to require platforms to use technology to identify and remove child sexual abuse material, even on private end-to-end encrypted messaging services. Critics argue that this is technically impossible to achieve without fundamentally breaking or bypassing the encryption that secures private communications for all users, thereby creating a serious threat to privacy and cybersecurity. Beyond the encryption debate, there are broader concerns that the Act creates a framework for censorship by proxy. The legislation does not involve direct state censorship. Rather, it places a heavy legal and financial duty on private companies. To avoid the risk of catastrophic fines, the rational commercial decision for these platforms is to adopt an overly cautious approach, removing any content that is borderline, controversial, or could be construed as harmful. This creates a system where the state sets the parameters and the financial risk, while private corporations carry out the speech restriction. 3.3a Counter-narrative. The Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act 2023. Complicating the narrative of a government solely focused on restricting expression is the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act 2023. This legislation moves in the opposite direction, creating new legal obligations on universities, colleges and students' unions in England to protect and promote freedom of speech and academic freedom on campus. The Act establishes a new Director for Freedom of Speech and Academic Freedom, informally a Free Speech Champion, on the board of the university regulator, the Office for Students, OFS. This director is empowered to oversee a new complaint scheme and to investigate institutions accused of breaching their free speech duties, with the OFS able to impose fines for non-compliance. Furthermore, the Act creates a new statutory tort, allowing individuals who suffer loss as a result of being no-platformed or having their free speech rights unlawfully restricted to seek compensation through the courts. Narrator Section 4. The Spectre of Civil War, a Theoretical and Applied Analysis. Narrator 4.1. Defining Civil War, Academic Criteria and Preconditions. Narrator. In political science, the term civil war has a specific and widely accepted definition. It is not a synonym for political unrest, social tension or rioting. A civil war is defined as a large-scale, sustained, and physically violent conflict that occurs within a country's borders. Narrator. Crucially, it involves politically organized actors. The conflict is principally between the state and one or more organized domestic groups challenging the state's monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force. Narrator 4.2. The state of UK social cohesion. Fractures in the body politic. Narrator. When measured against these preconditions, the current state of social cohesion in the UK presents a concerning picture, revealing significant fractures in the body politic. Narrator. The 2024 Khan Review, commissioned by the government, identified several contemporary threats to social cohesion and democratic resilience. It highlighted the widespread and corrosive impact of what it terms freedom-restricting harassment, threatening and intimidatory behavior both online and offline that leads to self-censorship and erodes democratic participation. Narrator. This sense of fragmentation is corroborated by research from the think tank More in Common. Their 2025 polling found that 44% of Britons say they sometimes feel like they are strangers in their own country, and half feel disconnected from the society around them. Narrator. The research identified a strong link between economic hardship and social disconnection, with 2/3, 67%, of those struggling financially feeling disconnected, compared to just 37% of those who are financially comfortable. Narrator. 4.3. Measuring political stability. Institutional resilience versus public trust. Narrator. On one hand, public trust in the political system is in a state of crisis. The 2024 British Social Attitudes Survey, conducted by the National Centre for Social Research, NatCen, reported record lows across a range of measures. An unprecedented 79% of the public believe the system of governing Britain needs quite a lot or a great deal of improvement. A record 45% state they almost never trust governments of any party to place the needs of the nation above their own party's interests. Narrator. On the other hand, when viewed through the lens of global governance indicators, the UK's formal institutions appear robust. Narrator. This stark contrast between public sentiment and institutional integrity is the central dynamic in assessing the UK's overall stability. Narrator. The UK is clearly exhibiting serious symptoms of social and political decay that align with the preconditions for instability. However, it is simultaneously missing the fundamental ingredients required to meet the definition of a pre-Civil War state. Narrator. Therefore, the greatest threat facing the UK is not a dramatic collapse of the state into violent conflict. Narrator. The more subtle and far more plausible danger is a slow and corrosive erosion of its democratic substance. When public trust evaporates on such a scale, citizens may still participate in elections, but they are more likely to disengage from wider civic life, become more susceptible to the disinformation and extremism identified in the Khan Review, and potentially become more receptive to populist or authoritarian solutions. The ultimate risk is not a civil war for control of the state's institutions, but a crisis of legitimacy that could lead to a less liberal, less participatory, and more dysfunctional form of democracy, even if its formal structures remain outwardly intact.